The wind moved through the endless Kansas wheat like a soft whisper carrying forgotten words, brushing past the weathered barn and dancing around the old scarecrow with its stitched grin and sagging hat. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a glow of blood orange and deepening purple, the kind of sky that made the world feel bigger than it had any right to be. 12-year-old Jonah Grayson stood barefoot in the dirt behind the house, holding a dented flashlight in one hand and a plastic bucket of chicken feed in the other, when he heard the sound something not quite mechanical, not quite natural. A soft hum, like a broken lullaby, folded into the night air. He turned toward the cornfield, heart thudding, not because he was scared, but because the sound was wrong, curious, alive. Then it came again, closer now, with a flickering shimmer of light, not bright, but blue, like a flame in sight glass. Jonah blinked once, twice, and then saw her. She didn't step out so much as dissolve from shadow, and even then, it wasn't clear if she was walking or hovering or floating. She was small, not much bigger than Jonah, but there was a strange grace in her movements, like she had never tripped or stubbed a toe or slipped in mud. Her skin shimmered a soft violet in the fading light, with a subtle texture that reminded Jonah of butterfly wings. Her eyes were too big for her face, glowing faintly with a sad, electric blue that made him feel like she could see every bad dream he ever had. Her thin arms were trembling, and there was blood black, thick, and sticky coating one side of her ribs, seeping through the torn shimmer of what might have once been clothing or armor or something else entirely. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a dry hiss, the shape of syllables without sound. And then she fell hard into the dirt, making the chickens scatter with clucks of alarm. Jonah didn't run. Not away, not inside. His chest was tight with fear, yes, but it was the kind of fear that made you move faster, not freeze. He dropped the bucket and was beside her in seconds, knees in the soil, hands reaching but hovering, unsure of where to touch, how to help. Her chest moved barely. Her eyes flickered open, wild with panic. And for a moment, he saw something behind them, a flash of something enormous and dark and cold, a memory not her own. "It's okay," he said, voice cracking, unsure why he said it, but needing to. "You're safe. You're on a farm, my farm." She didn't understand the words, he could tell, but the tone, the gentleness, seemed to cut through whatever. Terror was eating her. She stopped shaking. Her eyes blinked, slow and deliberate, like she was trying to memorize his face. Above them, the stars began to blink into the sky one by one. And for the first time in his life, Jonah felt like the universe had just noticed him back. He dragged her gently toward the barn, heart pounding, legs shaking under her weight. She wasn't heavy, but her body was strange, too light in some places, too dense in others, like lifting a sculpture made from wood and stone and silk all at once. The barn door creaked open, loud enough to make his ears flinch, and he pulled her inside, laying her gently on the old pile of straw where their cat usually gave birth to kittens. She didn't resist, just stared up at the rafters with wide, wet eyes, like she'd never seen wood before, like it was sacred. Jonah ran for the emergency box, grabbed a bottle of water, some rags, a flashlight, and a blanket that still smelled faintly of his dad. He returned, knelt, and slowly poured water over her wounds, wiping the dark blood away, his hands trembling as the alien girl whimpered softly, more like a frightened animal than a warrior. He didn't ask who she was, or where she came from, not yet. There would be time for that, maybe. For now, all he could do was try to stop the bleeding, try to keep her eyes open, try not to let the terror that had begun curling in his belly grow too fast. He knew this wasn't a dream. The wind outside was real. The straw smelled real. The pain in her eyes was real. And in some impossible, unspoken way, he knew that she had come from very far away, not just in space, but in suffering. She had lost something now, everything. And for reasons neither of them yet understood, she had landed here, in the middle of nowhere, in front of a lonely boy with a flashlight and a battered old soul dot in the dark. The girl reached out, trembling, and placed one glowing fingertip on Jonah's chest over his heart. Her touch was cold, electric. Then she closed her eyes and whispered the first word he could understand, though he wasn't sure how. Safe. Jonah sat beside her, watching the stars blink awake outside the cracks in the wooden slats, and realized the world had just changed forever. Asterisk, the barn was old, but thick with memories. Dust hung in the air like lazy spirits, and the scent of straw, rust, and oil wrapped around everything like a warm, broken quilt. Jonah sat cross-legged beside the alien girl, now curled under his dad's faded army blanket, and listened to her breathe. It was a quiet sound, too quiet, thin and uneven, like the wind struggling to find its voice. The chickens outside had finally calmed, and the distant murmur of the farmhouse's mom washing dishes, the muffled hum of the evening news, seemed so far away, like another planet. Jonah kept the flashlight low, its weak beam dancing across her strained skin. She wasn't like anything he'd ever seen in any of his sci-fi books or movies. She didn't glow in the way aliens always seem to. She wasn't terrifying, wasn't grand. She was just hurt, and that made her real. Jonah didn't know what to do, so he talked. His voice was soft and uncertain at first, the way you speak to a wounded dog or a shadow that might disappear. "I don't know who you are," he said, brushing his dirty fingers through his tangled blonde hair, "but you're not gonna die here." "Okay, not on my watch." She didn't answer, of course, but her eyes flickered open again, the color dimmer now, like a storm had rolled in behind them. He reached out and touched her arm, hesitant, barely a brush, and felt the cold smoothness of her skin. It pulsed faintly under his fingers, like something alive beneath the surface. He wondered if her kind had blood, if she had a heart, if she could even understand what was happening. "Your voice?" "Warm," she whispered, the words cracked and uneven, stitched together by breath and effort. Jonah jerked back slightly, shocked not by the words, but by the pain in them. It was like she had never used her voice before, or had forgotten how. The effort cost her something. She winced, and her body trembled like she'd touched fire. He wanted to cry, not out of fear, but frustration. He was just a kid. He knew how to change tires and fix fences and feed chickens, but none of that helped now. He didn't know how to save someone from another world. Still, something deeper than knowledge moved in him. He put both hands on hers, warmed to her ice, and didn't let go. "You need help," he whispered. "Real help. Not just me and my first aid kit and some bandages." He looked toward the farmhouse. Could he tell his mom? Would she believe him? Could she keep a secret this big? Jonah shook his head. No, not yet. Not until he knew more. Not until he was sure the alien girl wouldn't be taken away by men in black suits or dissected in labs or thrown on the news like some freak show. She wasn't a story. She was alive. She was scared. And she had come here to him. The night pressed closer, darker now. He fetched more blankets, stealing the thick one from the couch and slipping it through the back door, while his mom argued. With the TV in the living room, he warmed it in the dryer first, not because it would help much with whatever wounds she had, but because it felt like a kind thing to do. She accepted it with a faint flicker of her eyes, no smile, but something close. Then she reached into a pouch on what remained of her clothing and pulled out a small, flickering crystal, no bigger than Jonah's thumb. It pulsed slowly, a heartbeat of blue light, and cast faint shadows on the barn walls. She held it out to him. He took it, unsure why, and instantly felt a strange warmth radiate through his hand, up his arm, into his chest. For a moment, his breath caught. He was no longer in the barn. He saw things, shattered skies, burning stars, ships falling like rain, and voices crying out in silence. He saw a planet ripped apart, not by war, but by something colder, older, like a hunger that fed on life itself. He saw her running, always running. In a lone dot, he dropped the crystal, gasping, heart pounding, hands trembling. She didn't look surprised, only sad. "Showed too much," she rasped. "Sorry." Jonah shook his head, eyes wide. No, it's okay. "I get it now. You didn't just crash, you're running from something." She nodded, a slow, pained movement. Then she said a word and even though it was just a whisper, Jonah felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Not because of the word, but because of how much fear was packed inside that single syllable. He crouched down beside her again, closer this time. "I don't know what's coming after you," he said, his voice stronger now. "But I swear, I'm not gonna let them take you. You're safe here, with me." The barn was silent for a long time after that. Just the sound of breathing, the occasional rustle of hay, and the distant crackle of a baseball game playing on the old radio inside the house. But in that silence, something new began to take root trust, fragile as a newborn chick, but growing. Jonah didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight he would be her shield. He would be her shelter. Because if there was one thing, he understood one thing his dad had taught him before he left for the war and never came back. It was that strength wasn't always fists or guns. Sometimes strength was staying ** the next day, broke like any other. With the pale sun brushing soft light across the horizon and the dew on the wheat glistening like tiny worlds waiting to be born. But everything was different. Jonah woke before. The rooster crowed, his chest heavy with secrets. His mind tangled in the strange images that still lingered behind his eyes like half-remembered dreams. He slipped out of bed quietly, bypassing breakfast and the usual morning chores, making his way back to the barn with a stolen thermos of warm soup and a backpack stuffed with supplies bandages, a pillow, a roll of crackers, and his dad's old pocket knife, just in case. He didn't know what he'd need. He just knew she was still there, and he had to go to her. The barn greeted him with a hush, as if it too were waiting, holding its breath. She hadn't moved much, but her eyes were open now, and she was sitting up, legs curled beneath her, her fragile body still cloaked in the layers of blankets he'd brought the night before. She looked like a ghost in the morning, white pale, shimmering, almost not there, but she was. And when she saw him, something passed between them, silent but clear, not fear, not gratitude. Something closer to recognition, as if they were two puzzle pieces from different boxes, accidentally perfect for each other. "I brought food," Jonah said, kneeling beside her. He unscrewed the thermos cap and offered it with both hands. She looked at it, puzzled, hesitant. Then she touched it with 2 fingers and recoiled, the heat surprising her. Jonah laughed gently, not to mock, but because the moment felt like something real in a world that had cracked open into the impossible. "It's okay," he said, lifting the lid and blowing on the soup. "See, just hot. You blow on it, makes it better." He mimed it again, this time offering a small spoonful. She watched him like she was watching a wild animal perform an elaborate ritual. Then slowly, with fingers shaking, she took the spoon and sipped. A moment passed. Then her face changed, just a little, but enough for Jonah to see it. Relief. He exhaled. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. After the soup, they sat together in silence, and Jonah pulled out one of his old comic books, crinkled, creased, loved to near death. He opened it slowly, showing her the colorful pages, the bold letters, the masked heroes saving people just because it was the right thing to do. She leaned closer, entranced not by the art or the words, but by the idea. He could see it in her eyes, the wonder, the confusion, the aching need to believe in something as strange and beautiful as a hero who saved others with no reward. "I used to read these with my dad," Jonah said softly, flipping to a panel of a caped figure holding back a crumbling building with his bare hands. He liked the ones with sacrifice the best. Said it wasn't about how strong you were. It was what you were willing to lose for someone else. His voice cracked at the end. He hadn't talked about his dad in a long time. Not really. Not since the letter came. The girl didn't speak, but she reached out again, slower this time, and pressed her palm against Jonah's. The connection was lighter than before, but no less powerful. Images returned, not terrifying this time, but sad. A small hand reaching through bars. A voice calling for help that never came. A cold, red planet cracking like glass. She had lost family too. She had lost more than he could imagine. And yet here they were, 2 orphans beneath a tin roof, sharing soup and memories like sacred currency. "Does it still hurt?" he asked, not knowing exactly what he meant. Her body, her memories, her heart. She nodded, then looked down. Then said in a voice more sure than before, "But not alone." Jonah blinked. That simple sentence hit harder than any scream. She was right. Pain didn't vanish. But sharing it, even with a stranger, even across galaxies, it made it bearable. He scooted closer, offering her more soup, more comfort, more pieces of himself. He told her about his dad's truck that hadn't worked since the funeral. About his mom who smiled with her mouth, but never her eyes. About the loneliness that came not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who didn't see the world the same way he did. She listened. And then she pointed at the sky, through a crack in the barn's roof, where a sliver of blue stretched into the heavens. "Home," she whispered. "Gone." Jonah swallowed the lump in his throat. He couldn't imagine losing Earth, but he could imagine losing the feeling of home. And that was enough. They stayed like that all day. Trading stories not always in words, but in gestures and eyes and shared stillness. It was the kind of bond no language needed. The kind built on vulnerability and silence. And though the world outside kept spinning, though the sun rose and fell, and the farm carried on without them, inside the barn, a new kind of world was being born, fragile, sacred, human and not human, and held together by the simplest, strongest thing there was. Compassion. It began with a vibration. Barely noticeable at first, just a soft tremor under the barn floor, like a truck idling somewhere far away. Jonah paused mid-sentence, the flashlight casting shadows along the wall, as he read aloud from an old book about Earth's oceans, something he thought might comfort her, connect her to the beauty of his planet. But the sound made him freeze. The alien girl who now answered to the name he had given her, Solari, because her skin reminded him of the glowing edges of the sun, tilted her head. Her eyes sharpened. The warmth that had grown between them like ivy stopped blooming. She whispered something in a language of sharp tones and trembling breath, and then slowly pulled the crystal from her pouch again. It no longer pulsed softly. It was flickering, fast, wild, afraid. Jonah knelt beside her, his mouth dry. What is it? What's wrong? She held the crystal toward him and closed her eyes. The barn fell away. In its place came a memory hers, but now his too. A cold world, black skies pierced by silver ships, cities floating above oceans that boiled with strange life. He saw her people, tall, graceful, luminous, living in peace, curious and kind, until they came. Not with fire, but silence. Dark. Smooth machines that fell from orbit without warning, no faces, no voices, no reasons. Just hunger. Not for food or land, but for energy, memory, life. Solari's people called them the Hollow. Jonah saw one in the memory, a creature of shifting, metal and shadow, moving with unnatural stillness. It touched a tree, and the tree withered in seconds. It touched a child, and the scream echoed across the stars. Solari had run. She was chosen not because she was strong, but because she was pure, carried a seed of something old inside her. A memory, a code, a hope. Her ship wasn't meant to crash. It was meant to escape, but the Hollow had followed. Through light years, across systems. And now they were here. Jonah jerked away, gasping. His heart pounded like a trapped animal. He stared at Solari, who looked smaller now, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, as if she could somehow hide the terrible truth. They're coming? He asked, though the answer was already sinking in. Solari nodded. A single silent nod that felt like the sky itself had cracked. Jonah stood, pacing, fingers pulling at his hair. The farm, his mom, the animals, his town, they had no idea. No warning, no weapons. What could they possibly do against something that had wiped out a civilization with no sound, no mercy? He looked back at Solari, who watched him with that terrible, calm, the calm of someone who had already accepted the worst. I have to tell someone, he whispered, reaching for the barn door. The sheriff, the army, somebody. But she stood, stumbling to her feet, stopping him with a cry so desperate, so raw, it made him freeze. She reached out, her voice shaking. No, not trust, not ready. They take me, destroy, hope gone. Jonah turned slowly. She was right, of course she was. The moment anyone found her, she'd be locked away, examined, feared. People feared what they didn't understand. It was in their bones. He remembered how his town treated anyone different. He remembered the sideways looks his mom got for being quiet, for keeping to herself after his dad died. He remembered how the teachers looked at him when he stopped raising his hand in class, when he started drawing strange machines in the margins of his math homework. The world didn't handle the unknown well. Not with kindness. Then what do? We do, he asked, sinking to the floor again. We just wait. Let them come. Solari knelt beside him, the crystal between them. No, wait, she said, her voice stronger now. We run, we hide seed. Save world. Seed? He echoed. She pointed at her chest. Memory, pattern of my world. All life, all knowledge. And me. Her hands trembled as she pressed them over her heart. If Hollow take me, Earth next, they follow Spark. Jonah understood now. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a key. Her life carried the echo of an entire race. A spark that the Hollow hunted not out of cruelty, but instinct like moths to flame. They followed what they couldn't control. Her presence here was a beacon. A danger, but also maybe the only chance humanity had. He swallowed the panic, building in his throat. Okay, he said. Then we hide you. Somewhere far. Somewhere safe. We find a way to stop them. Or warn the world. Or something. Anything. But outside, the wind had changed. The air felt heavier. The birds were quiet. Far on the horizon, a faint glimmer blinked against the afternoon sky, a shimmer of movement. Too perfect, too fast, to be natural. Jonah didn't need Solari to tell him. They had arrived, and the clock had begun to tick. The farm had never felt so small. Jonah stood at the edge of the field, heart pounding in his ears, as the shimmer on the horizon sharpened into something real. 3 dark figures, gliding inches above the wheat, moving without sound or hesitation. Their outlines flickering like broken holograms. The Hollow had come. They weren't monstrous in size. They didn't roar or breathe fire, but their silence was worse. Their presence felt like the air was thinning, like they were erasing not just sound but memory, life meaning itself. The wheat where they passed began to die in waves, first golden, then gray, then ash. Jonah turned and ran back in the barn. Solari was already on her feet, her skin flickering with light patterns, defensive, ancient, instinctive. Her hands glowed faintly as she touched the crystal again, pressing it deep against her chest. She looked up at him, and Jonah could see it in her eyes. She meant to leave, to run again. Not out of cowardice, but protection, sacrifice. He slammed the door behind him, breath ragged, every part of him screaming in fear, but he stood in front of her like a wall. No, he said, shaking. You don't go. Not alone. Not again. Solari. Blink slowly. They find me. Soon. No time. If I stay. They take everything. Jonah knew she was right. If they caught her, if they absorbed the seed she carried, Earth would become just another ghost world. But letting her go alone, it wasn't strength. It was surrender. He backed away, thinking fast. The cellar. Old tornado shelter, dug out. Behind the cornfield. Buried under a mound of scrap metal and forgotten supplies. They hadn't used it in years. But it was deep, hidden, maybe enough to mask her signal. He grabbed a rope from the wall and slung on his backpack again. Come with me, he said. We'll hide you. Then I'll figure out how to lead them away. Her eyes widened. You help me. Die for me? No, he said, his voice iron. I live for you. That's the difference. They moved fast. Through the back of the barn, ducking into shadows as the shimmer of the hollow grew brighter against the farmhouse's horizon. The sky was beginning to ripple above them, clouds twisting into spirals like bruises forming in the air. Jonah held her hand as they ran, her body shaking with exhaustion and dread, but still she kept up. Still she moved like a spark clinging to life. The cellar door was wrested shut, vines clinging to the hinges, but he kicked and pulled until it broke free. Revealing a staircase into cold darkness. She hesitated at the top step, her eyes turning toward the field where the hollow had begun to spread like oil. Jonah touched her cheek, gentle. You said this world wasn't ready, but maybe it is, just not all of it. Not yet, but I am, and I won't let them win. She nodded once, then descended, vanishing into the dark. He closed the door, scattered hay over it, and turned to face the dying wind. The first hollow was already at the edge of the property. Jonah stepped into the open. He didn't know what they saw when they looked at him. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. A boy, a threat, an echo of defiance. They didn't speak, didn't change speed. One of them shifted toward him, its form reassembling like mercury sliding into shape. Jonah raised both arms, showing them he was unarmed. He felt the ground around him grow cold. She's gone, he said, though he knew they might not understand. Words. You missed her. She's not here. The hollow stopped inches from him. No face, just a blank mirror of void. But something looked at him, something old. And in that moment, Jonah understood these things weren't alive the way he was. They were programs, predators, purpose forged into shape. They didn't feel hate or fear or mercy, but they felt energy, life force, meaning. And Solari's spark burned like a star compared to his flickering candle. But maybe, just maybe, if he burned brighter for a moment, they would follow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Solari's crystal worm, stolen while she slept and filled with fragments of her essence. He didn't need to understand how it worked, just that it did. He crushed it in his hand, forcing the energy into himself. Light burst from his skin and jacket cracks, and the hollow reacted instantly. All three jerking toward him like hounds sniffing fresh blood. He ran out, not toward the house, not toward safety, toward the woods, toward the cliffs beyond the North Ridge, where the wind howled and the terrain twisted into deep ravines. They followed faster than shadows, the ground dying beneath them. Trees withered, birds scattered. Jonah's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. Because this was the only way. He had to draw them far enough to buy her time, to let her hide. To give Earth one more day at the ridge's edge, he stopped. The wind tore at his clothes, the edge of the cliff just feet away. Behind him, the hollow approached. Slower now, curious, watching. He stood tall, arms out, heart pounding like a war drum. You want her? He shouted. You'll have to. Take me first. And then he jumped. The fall was long. The dark cold. But Jonah smiled, because in that moment, he wasn't running, he was choosing. Asterisk the world. Returned in flashes, cold, pain, darkness. Jonah's body hit the river with bone snapping. Force, the current seizing him like a beast and dragging him through icy waters, over sharp rocks and under drowning silence. He didn't know how long he was under, seconds, minutes. Time blurred into sensation, but instinct took over where strength failed, and somehow he kicked, clawed, gasped his way to the surface. Coughing, sputtering, every limb screaming, he crawled onto the shore, broken and alive. Above, the sky seethed with unnatural clouds, lightning flashing without sound, as if the storm itself had been muted by the presence of those unnatural beings. He rolled onto his back, shivering in the mud, chest heaving, and stared at the sky. No Hollow, not here. Not now. He had pulled them away. He had given her time. But something inside him whispered it wasn't over. The crystal's energy was still inside him, faint, but burning. He could feel it like a heartbeat in his ribs, like a second soul struggling to stay awake. It hadn't killed him, not yet, but it had changed him. He could feel thoughts not his own flitting at the edge of his awareness, old thoughts, alien patterns, memories and fragments Solari's laughter as a child, the feel of her world's twin moons on her skin, the hum of her people's cities before the silence. They weren't just stored in the crystal, they were part of him now. That made him dangerous. That made him a target, somewhere deep in the forest behind the ridge. He stumbled upon the remnants of a trail old hunting paths his father had shown him, long before everything changed. He followed it on shaking legs, bloodied palms dragging against tree bark, breath wheezing through cracked ribs. The storm followed above, not chasing him now, but searching. He could feel them again, one, maybe two, hollow scanning the area like wolves that had lost the scent. He had to act before they found the trail back to the barn. Before they circled around and closed in on Solari, she was alone. She was still weak, and he had led the pack straight into the trees dot at the edge of the woods. He stopped. The old water tower, a relic from when the farm had been part of a larger irrigation system. It stood crooked and forgotten, half its ladder rusted through, the tank sagging like an old man's spine. But it was high, exposed, visible for miles. A beacon. Jonah knew what he had to do. Not run, not hide, not anymore. He had to make them see him. All of them. He scaled the tower with fists clenched tight, ignoring the pain, the blood, the bruises. At the top, he collapsed against the rail, looked out at the world, his world, and screamed. Not words, not names. Just rage, defiance, life. A roar from a boy who had nothing left to lose but the right to exist. The hollow responded. Below, the trees bent unnaturally. The air screamed without sound. One appeared from the shadows, gliding over the grass like death reborn, its form warping between forms, metal and shadow and silence. Jonah stood, broken, yes, but unyielding. He didn't have weapons. He didn't have armor or lasers or shields. But he had Solari's spark. He had her memory inside him. He had love, pain, hope, and as the hollow rose into the air before him, its appendages blooming into unnatural shapes, he stepped forward and let the crystal's light burn through his. Skinned up the world lit up not in flames, but in truth. The light wasn't a weapon, it was a message. A transmission. A final echo of a race that had died singing. And it hit the hollow like a wave of fire, not destroying it, but revealing it, making it feel. Jonah's memories, his father's embrace, his mother's quiet strength, the sound of summer rain. The ache of being 12, and alone all of it spilled into the hollow's blank mind, like color flooding a black and white photograph, and it screamed, not aloud. Not with voice, but with the shudder of its body, with the violent distortion of its form, as something like pain or remorse ripped through it. The light engulfed it, not burning, but changing, making it remember what it had forgotten. Before it was machine, before it was program, it had once been alive. Long, long ago, something had taken that away. And now Jonah's fire lit the ashes dot. It collapsed in midair. Not dead, but silenced, hushed, stunned. Jonah fell to his knees, vision. Swimming, heart stumbling. The light in his veins flickered, then dimmed. But before it vanished, he saw Solari running toward him across the field. Hair streaming, face lit with horror and awe, and something else. Love. She caught him before he hit the ground. Held him close. Her hands glowed as they tried to heal. But it wasn't enough. He smiled at her through cracked lips. Told you we weren't weak. She wept silver tears. And in the sky above, the remaining hollow stopped. Watching. Waiting. Changed. Asterisk. Jonah woke to warmth. Not the heat of sun or fire, but something gentle radiating from the earth beneath him, from the arms wrapped around his chest, from from the soft pulse of energy that moved like water through his veins. The pain was still there, but distant, muffled, like a memory that no longer had claws. Above him, the clouds had cleared, and the first stars were peeking through the folds of twilight. The sky was calm again. The wind no longer whispered of death. He turned his head slowly and saw her Solari sitting close, her legs folded beneath her, her eyes no longer glowing with fear, but filled with something ancient and tender. Her hands rested over his chest, glowing faintly, not to heal anymore, but simply to stay connected. She had chosen not to leave. She had chosen him. In the distance, the hollow stood frozen on the edge of the wheat field. Just one now, the last of the three. Its body flickered with hesitation, no longer sleek and sharp, but trembling, like it had been shaken awake from a long, cruel dream. The others, Jonah didn't know what had become of them. The one that had tried to take him at the water tower had simply stopped, not exploded, not fled. It had just ceased, folding in on itself and drifting away like mist. And the third, perhaps, it had seen enough to question its mission. Or perhaps it, too, had tasted Jonah's fire. Solari helped him sit up, cradling his shoulder as he winced. "They feel now," she whispered, the words trembling with awe. "You broke the forgetting." Jonah swallowed hard, his throat raw. "I didn't break anything," he murmured. "I just showed them what we are." Solari tilted her head. "And what is that?" He looked at her then, through the haze of exhaustion, through the veil of everything they'd endured, and gave the only answer he could. Alive. The hollow at the field's edge took one slow step forward. Jonah tensed, but Solari placed a calming hand on his chest. "Wait," she said softly. "It chooses," and then the impossible happened. The hollow knelt dotted, then slowly, as if unused to the motion, and touched the earth with a long silver limb. A pulse spread outward from its fingers, a ripple of golden light that passed over the dead wheat, and where it moved, life returned. The stalks straightened, the color deepened. Flowers bloomed among them, and then the hollow turned its form, shimmering into transparency, and vanished into the night sky with no sound, no trail, no war. Solari stared at the place it had been for a long time. "They were made," she whispered, "long ago. Machines to protect, to record, but they lost themselves, became hollow." Jonah nodded. He understood now. The hollow had not been born evil. They had been guardians, corrupted by time and grief and silence. Somewhere along the way, they had forgotten how to feel, how to remember why life was worth saving. And it had taken a human, a stubborn, scared, broken boy to remind them. They returned to the barn as the stars came out in full. Jonah limped, leaning on Solari, who now walked taller, stronger. Her skin shimmered with new patterns, softer, warmer. Not just survival anymore, but belonging. Inside the barn, they lit a lantern and sat together in the straw, sharing crackers and silence. Every so often, Jonah would glance at her and wonder what would come next. Would the hollow return? Would Earth change? Would she leave? As if reading his thoughts, she reached into her pouch and removed the last remaining shard of the crystal, barely a sliver, but still glowing. She pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers around it. "You keep," she said. "If spark lost, light again." He stared at it, feeling the quiet hum beneath his skin. "What about you?" "I stay," she answered simply. "Not to hide, to grow, to learn your world. You showed me your fire. I want to show mine." Jonah laughed softly, the sound full of tears and relief. "My mom's gonna lose her mind." Solari smiled, then small, crooked, and entirely real. Later that night, as he curled up in his old bed and she rested in the hayloft above, the world felt still, safe, changed. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, a race of forgotten machines had paused their endless harvest. Somewhere on Earth, the future had shifted just a little toward something better, not because of weapons, not because of strength, but because one boy had chosen empathy over fear, had said stay instead of run, had jumped instead of begged, and as Jonah drifted into sleep, fingers curled around the crystal's last flicker, he thought of his father's words. Sometimes strength is staying, but sometimes strength is lighting a match in the dark and daring the universe to notice.